What was meant to be a simple evening, perhaps even a turning point, instead became the moment everything fractured. Sheila entered the date with Deacon carrying a fragile hope she refused to name out loud. She sensed the distance between them, the way his thoughts drifted elsewhere, the subtle hesitation in his gestures. But she told herself that time could still soften the cracks. The restaurant lights, the polite smiles, the forced normalcy all felt thin, like scenery hastily erected to conceal a truth neither of them wanted to confront. Sheila had endured suspicion, rejection, and fear her entire life, yet nothing prepared her for the quiet ache of realizing that the one person she believed anchored her world was already slipping beyond her reach. The emotional strain pressed on her chest long before her body finally gave in. And when she collapsed, it was not only exhaustion that pulled her under but the unbearable weight of abandonment she had been fighting to deny. The hospital room stripped everything down to essentials. Bright lights, antiseptic air, the relentless beeping of machines. There was no space left for denial. When the test results arrived, the revelation cut through Deacon with a force that left him stunned. Sheila was pregnant. The words reshaped the room, bending time itself. For Deacon, responsibility did not arrive as a choice but as an instinct, heavy and immediate. Whatever confusion had surrounded his feelings, whatever hopes he had begun to entertain with Taylor, suddenly felt distant, almost irrelevant in the face of a life about to begin. He had spent years trying to prove that he was more than his past, more than his mistakes, and the idea of turning away now felt like repeating the very failures he had sworn to escape. Guilt, duty, and a deeply ingrained desire to do the right thing tangled inside him, making it nearly impossible to separate love from obligation. Sheila, waking to the truth of her pregnancy, experienced something far more complicated than triumph. For a woman who had lived so much of her life in survival mode, the knowledge that she was carrying a child brought terror alongside hope. This was not a scheme or a weapon, not something she could control through manipulation. It was fragile, real, and terrifyingly permanent. The fear of losing Deacon did not vanish with the confirmation of pregnancy. Instead, it sharpened. She knew better than anyone that love born of responsibility alone could curdle into resentment. Yet she also understood that this child tethered Deacon to her in a way nothing else ever could. For the first time in a long while, Sheila was not plotting her next move. She was simply afraid of being alone, afraid of failing as a mother, afraid that even this miracle might not be enough to keep the man she loved from choosing someone else. Deacon found himself standing at the center of an emotional crossroads, pulled in opposite directions by equally powerful truths. His connection with Taylor had awakened something in him that felt clean, grounded, and hopeful. With her, he glimpsed a future shaped by honesty rather than survival, by mutual respect rather than shared damage. Yet the news of Sheila's pregnancy shattered the illusion that he could simply walk forward without consequence. Every step toward Taylor now felt like a step away from responsibility. And that realization gnawed at him relentlessly. He questioned his own motives, wondering whether his desire for happiness was merely another form of selfishness. The idea of abandoning a pregnant woman, regardless of their complicated history, clashed violently with the values he had spent years trying to rebuild. Taylor learned the truth not through confrontation but through inevitability. The news reached her quietly, yet its impact was devastating. She understood immediately what it meant, not just practically but morally. For all the pain she carried from her own past, for all the times she had been forced to step aside for the sake of others, this moment felt uniquely cruel. Taylor had not pursued Deacon recklessly or carelessly. She had resisted her feelings until they became impossible to ignore. And yet, faced with the reality of a child on the way, she recognized a boundary she could not cross. The idea of becoming the reason a family fractured before it even formed was incompatible with everything she believed about compassion, healing, and responsibility. Her decision did not come easily. It arrived slowly, painfully, shaped by nights of reflection and the familiar ache of self-sacrifice. Taylor had spent much of her life prioritizing others, often at great personal cost, and stepping back now felt both noble and devastating. She questioned whether she was once again choosing duty over desire, whether she was denying herself happiness out of habit rather than necessity. But the image of a child growing up amid resentment and divided loyalties haunted her. Taylor knew that even if Deacon stayed with her, the shadow of what he left behind would poison any future they tried to build. Love, she believed, could not thrive on the ruins of another woman's vulnerability. Reluctantly, painfully, Taylor chose to step aside. Her withdrawal was not dramatic or accusatory but quiet, heavy with unspoken grief. In giving Sheila the space to reclaim Deacon, Taylor was not endorsing their past or excusing Sheila's actions. She was acknowledging the reality of the present. The choice demanded emotional strength, not weakness, and it cost her deeply. Walking away meant accepting solitude once again, not because she lacked worth, but because she refused to build happiness at the expense of a child's stability. It was a decision rooted in empathy, even when empathy hurt. For Sheila, Taylor's retreat carried a complex mix of relief and unease. She sensed that this victory, if it could be called that, was not won through manipulation or force. It was handed to her through sacrifice, and that knowledge unsettled her. The presence of the baby reframed everything. Sheila could no longer define herself solely through conflict and obsession. She was now responsible for a life beyond her own emotional needs. And that responsibility forced her to confront parts of herself she had long avoided. Whether she could rise to that challenge remained uncertain. But the possibility of change lingered. Fragile and untested, Deacon, caught between gratitude and regret, struggled to reconcile the outcome with his conscience. He could not ignore the cost of Taylor's decision, nor could he deny the weight of Sheila's condition. Staying felt necessary, but necessity did not erase longing. He mourned the future he had briefly envisioned with Taylor, even as he committed himself to the family forming before him. The tension between what he wanted and what he believed was right followed him relentlessly, shaping every interaction and every quiet moment of reflection. In the end, this turning point did not offer simple resolutions or clear victories. Instead, it deepened the emotional landscape, transforming love into a test of character rather than a reward. Sheila's pregnancy altered the balance of power, not by granting her control, but by demanding responsibility from everyone involved. Taylor's retreat illuminated the quiet heroism of choosing compassion over desire, even when it breaks one's heart. Deacon's struggle revealed that redemption is rarely clean or comfortable, often requiring sacrifices that leave lasting scars. What emerges from this moment is not certainty but possibility. A child represents hope but also accountability. Love persists, but it changes shape, constrained by circumstance and moral choice. In stepping back, Taylor does not disappear from the story, she becomes its conscience. In staying, Deacon does not erase his longing, he accepts its burden. And Sheila, standing on the edge of motherhood, faces the most unpredictable challenge of all. The chance to become someone new, not through obsession or survival, but through care, restraint, and the fragile promise of life yet to come. Suspicion, once planted, has a way of growing silently, feeding on instinct rather than proof. For Taylor, the announcement of Sheila's pregnancy did not arrive as a moment of shock so much as a confirmation of something she had already felt settling uneasily in her chest. Too many details felt misaligned, too many emotional turns came too conveniently. And Taylor's life as a psychiatrist had taught her to trust patterns as much as words. While others accepted the news as fate, Taylor remained still, listening to what was not being said. She did not doubt that a pregnancy existed, but the claim that Deacon was the father lingered in her mind like an unresolved equation. The stakes were too high, the consequences too permanent, to allow uncertainty to masquerade as truth. Love, responsibility, and identity all hung in the balance. And Taylor understood that clarity, however painful, was the only ethical path forward. Asking Deacon to demand a paternity test was not an act of jealousy. Nor was it an attempt to reclaim control. It was, instead, a final appeal to reason in a situation rapidly being overtaken by emotion. Taylor knew that once Deacon accepted the role of father without question, every other possibility would collapse beneath the weight of obligation. She also knew that if she remained silent, doubt would corrode whatever future awaited him, whether with Sheila or without her. The request carried emotional risk. It exposed Taylor to the possibility of humiliation, of being proven wrong, of watching the man she loved step irrevocably into a life that no longer included her. Yet refusing to ask would have been a betrayal of her own principles. Truth mattered, not because it could change the outcome, but because it would define the integrity of every choice that followed. Deacon received the request with a conflict that mirrored his entire existence. His life had been shaped by moments where instinct battled responsibility, where desire clashed with consequence. Agreeing to the test felt like a quiet rebellion against the gravity already pulling him toward Sheila, yet refusing would have felt like surrendering his agency altogether. He carried guilt for even questioning the situation, as though doubt itself were a moral failure. Still, somewhere beneath that guilt lived a need to know, a need to stand on something solid rather than emotion alone. Deacon had spent too much of his life reacting rather than choosing. And this moment demanded a choice grounded in truth, no matter how devastating it might prove. Sheila, for her part, experienced the request as both an insult and a threat. To her, the pregnancy was not merely biological fact but emotional currency, proof that she and Deacon were bound in a way no one else could undo. Being asked to verify that bond felt like a challenge to her legitimacy. A suggestion that her word alone was insufficient. Yet she also understood that refusing the test would plant suspicion too deep to ever fully uproot. For perhaps the first time in a long while, Sheila found herself unable to manipulate the situation to her advantage. The truth, whatever it was, stood beyond her control, and that realization unsettled her more than anger ever could. The waiting period became a crucible for all three. Time stretched, heavy with imagined outcomes. Taylor oscillated between resolve and grief, preparing herself for a confirmation she already sensed was coming. She confronted her own vulnerability, questioning whether her insistence on proof was merely a way to delay the inevitable. Yet each time doubt threatened to weaken her, she returned to the same truth. Certainty was not cruelty, it was compassion, even when it hurt. Deacon, meanwhile, wrestled with conflicting loyalties. His feelings for Taylor did not vanish in the face of responsibility. If anything, they sharpened, intensified by the knowledge that he might soon lose her. He questioned whether love that survives only in memory was still worth honoring, or whether responsibility demanded the erasure of longing altogether. When the results finally arrived, they did so without ceremony, their simplicity cruel in its finality. Deacon was the father. No ambiguity, no margin for reinterpretation. The confirmation landed not as an explosion but as a slow, crushing weight, settling into every corner of the room and every corner of their lives. For Deacon, the truth closed a door even as it opened another. Whatever uncertainty had allowed him to imagine alternatives evaporated in that moment. The future now carried a face he had not yet seen, a life dependent on his presence, his consistency, his willingness to stay. Taylor absorbed the news with a composure that masked the depth of its impact. Evidence, once revealed, stripped away every remaining argument she might have made, even to herself. There was no ethical ground left on which to stand beside Deacon. The reality was unyielding. He was about to become a father, and that role demanded not distance but commitment. Taylor understood that love, no matter how genuine, could not justify competing with a child's need for stability. Accepting this truth felt like surrendering something sacred, yet denying it would have meant compromising everything she believed about responsibility and care. Deacon's reaction to the confirmation was immediate and irrevocable. He did not celebrate, nor did he retreat into denial. Instead, he accepted the truth with the quiet gravity of a man who understands that some moments reshape the entire trajectory of a life. His lingering feelings for Taylor did not disappear. They remained, painful and unresolved, but they could no longer guide his actions. Fatherhood was no longer an abstract possibility but an imminent reality, one that demanded presence, sacrifice, and permanence. Deacon recognized that choosing Taylor now, even with honesty, would fracture the foundation of the life he was responsible for creating. Responsibility, in this moment, was not a punishment but a calling he could not refuse. Taylor's final decision unfolded not as a dramatic confrontation but as an internal reckoning. Faced with evidence that could not be dismissed or reframed, she released Deacon with a mixture of sorrow and clarity. Letting go did not mean she stopped loving him. It meant she refused to love him in a way that required someone else's loss. Taylor accepted that Deacon's place was beside the mother of his child. Not because Sheila had won, but because the child deserved wholeness rather than divided loyalty. In stepping away, Taylor reclaimed her own integrity, even as she grieved the future she had briefly allowed herself to imagine. For Sheila, the confirmation altered her position in ways she had not anticipated. While the result anchored Deacon to her, it also stripped away illusion. This bond was no longer romantic fantasy but shared responsibility. Sheila sensed, perhaps for the first time, that Deacon's presence was rooted less in desire than in duty, and that realization carried its own insecurity. The power she believed the pregnancy granted her was tempered by the awareness that love compelled freely is different from love compelled by obligation. Whether Sheila could accept that difference, or transform it into something genuine, remained uncertain. The aftermath of the test left no one untouched. Deacon moved forward burdened not only by responsibility but by the quiet mourning of a love he could not pursue. Taylor stepped back into solitude, carrying the dignity of a choice made in compassion rather than defeat. Sheila stood at the threshold of motherhood, confronted by the challenge of becoming someone worthy of the future she now held in her hands. The truth, once revealed, did not resolve the tension. It deepened it, redefining love as something constrained by reality rather than guided by desire alone. In the end, the paternity test did more than confirm biological fact. It clarified moral boundaries, exposed emotional fault lines, and forced each character to confront who they were willing to become when love collided with responsibility. Taylor's acceptance was not passive resignation but active courage. Deacon's decision was not romantic sacrifice but ethical necessity. And Sheila's position, though strengthened by certainty, carried the greatest challenge of all, transforming obligation into genuine connection. What remains is not closure, but a new emotional terrain shaped by truth, where every future choice will echo the moment when doubt was replaced by undeniable proof.